Welcome to Soul via Soul, the podcast where we embark on a journey of self-love and true wellness. I'm your host, Jada, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here with me as we dive into all things mind, body, and soul. Now, what do you say we get this thing started? Let's dive in. Hi, and welcome back to Soul via Soul. Today on the podcast, we are actually going to be talking with Chris. Chris is the host of the Mental Health Movement podcast, and he calls this the voice for the voiceless, and he is a mental health advocate. And I am super excited to welcome him on the podcast today because I was a guest on his podcast, and it was so enlightening to hear, especially mental health from the point of view of a guy. And for all the guy listeners out there, I think you're going to find this especially beneficial. So let's welcome Chris. Come on in.
Hi, Jada. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Nice to see you again.
Great to see you.
I don't know whose podcast is going to come out first, mine or yours. So it doesn't matter to me, but I am so excited to chat with you again. I loved our podcast talk, and I especially loved how we started down the road of you sharing your story of what your mental health journey has been. And I think it's especially enlightening for men who maybe have been given this cultural message that you can't talk about these things, you can't share, you can't talk about your feelings, and what the heck is an emotion, and we're just going to shut that down, rub some dirt on it, pretend it's not there. So I am delighted that you're going to shed a little bit light, and we chatted right before we started recording, share as much or as little about your personal journey and being a mental health advocate. Tell us a little bit about what your mission now and your passions are in life.
So my number one passion is mental health. I grew up in a home where, my dad wasn't really emotionally there. He didn't really raise me to show me what a man should be like, right? And the definition of being a man, I feel like, changes day to day. It's like, we're supposed to be the protector, we're supposed to be the provider, we're supposed to be emotionally strong for everybody around them. And what you don't see is behind the curtains, and that's what my main goal to do with my platform is pull back that curtain and show you that there are so many guys that are struggling in silence because, like you alluded to, we have to rub dirt in it. We can't show our emotion. We're not allowed to cry. And, when I was about 14 years old, I had my first attempt, 14 years old, that demographic, that age group is the number two killer is suicide in that age group. And when I had my first attempt, thankfully, didn't go through with it, had a resource officer tackle me to the ground, and, I was brought to the harbor, which is, a psychiatric, like, little hospital. Mm-hmm. They paired me with a therapist who specialized in gambling. She was a gambling addict therapist. Mind you, this was 2007, so resources aren't anything like they are now.
Right.
And I didn't get anything. I couldn't tell you one lesson that she gave to me or anything to take away from those 2 weeks of outpatient therapy, because it was a joke, honestly. And, as cruel as that sounds says to say out loud, it's one of those things where mental health has been, treated as, you're crazy if you have anxiety, you're all these words if you're depressed, and you have to take medication. You have to essentially take it on the chin and not talk about it. And that was me probably 90% of my life, is not talking about anything that I was going through. And trying to withstand all the trauma, the abuse in my household, mainly for my mom, which, again, that's another discussion that isn't had is toxic mothers, because
Mm.
there are just as many toxic mothers as there are fathers.
Yeah.
But for some reason, society says, we're going to uplift women. Let's talk about our problems. Let's, get everybody in therapy and we're all going to stand together. But when it comes to like parenthood, it's like, oh, the father is evil, the father this, the father that. I feel like if we get to a point where we could meet in the middle and say, hey, both sides are struggling,
Yeah.
both sides are wrong in so many situations. And male suicide being at an all-time high, it is just so heartbreaking because every time I've ever uploaded content onto TikTok, if I say men's mental health matters too, people flip out when I say too, because
Really?
it's like, yeah, I've
Now,
had
are the
people,
men or women flipping out?
both.
Interesting.
um I've had people say, oh, well, women's mental health matters more, or women's mental health matters too. I'm like, I didn't say either one of those things aren't the truth.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking to fight an uphill battle, but my mission stays the same. I try my best to pull back that curtain and share my story the best that I can to my ability.
Yeah. And that statistic is shocking. And I'm really glad that you brought up the taboo word of suicide, because I haven't really touched on that yet in the podcast. And it's a difficult one to navigate because we don't talk about it as much as we should. Number one, statistically, men are more apt to actually go through with suicide, even though more women attempt. That's
Right.
what the research shows. And, if a guy decides he's checking out, there's a good chance he's going to check out. And so we have to really raise our awareness, because that is unacceptable,
Right.
that we have that differential. Now, suicide in and of itself is a difficult topic to navigate. And I think there's something that I really want to also talk about with suicide, since you brought it up. So let's touch on that first. And that is, I don't want to normalize the idea of suicide, but what I do want to normalize is that a lot of people struggle with the thought of, I wonder what it would be like if I weren't here.
Right.
And that's within the realm of normal. To have a thought like that doesn't mean that you are suicidal.
Right.
And so a lot of times, and I've had people come in to share with me, and they're afraid to tell me how they authentically feel, because they're automatically afraid that if they hint that they have a suicidal thought, that I'm going to call 911 and they're going to be admitted. And so people hold back because there's a fear that if I say that word, I'm going to lose autonomy and control, and I'm going to be voluntarily shuttled off to a place that I don't want to be.
Right.
And it's within the scope of normal to have those thoughts of having a distressive thought of, what would it be like if I weren't here? And to grapple with that within the realm of normality, and being able to share that with a therapist, and have that therapist say, or person or friend or colleague or anybody who happens to be listening, that doesn't mean that someone is suicidal. It might, and you need to ask more questions. But, and I know you've heard this, but, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And generally speaking, people just want the pain to stop. It's
Exactly.
not that they really want to leave this earth, generally speaking, but they're in so much pain. And I think if we just speak to the pain, like, at what point, and hopefully someone did in this, point in your life, did someone speak to that pain that allowed you to feel heard and seen, so that you saw that there were other avenues for your life?
So after the first attempt, in the outpatient therapy, I just kind of became numb, and that probably lasted well over a decade. Between working in retail for like 6 years and just working, keeping my head down, just trying to fight through, still
Wow.
dealing with all the stuff at home that was really bad. And it wasn't until my second attempt, where somebody actually saw me and heard me. It's somebody that I recently lost. This year was 2 years of his passing, and it was somebody I consider a brother. He called me because I wrote a suicide note on Facebook, and I deleted it within 10 minutes because I said I don't want that attention. And speaking from somebody who's been at that in that position, at the end of the day, when you're feeling suicidal, you just want to be heard. You
Yeah.
just want somebody to feel and see you for
Correct.
what you're going through. And he called me. He's like, "Hey, man, I just want to let you know that I saw your post, and something called out to me to reach out to you." And we talked for about an hour about the things that were going on at my mom's house because things got really bad there.
Yeah.
And he talked me down from that position that I was in. And ironically enough, there was a second person that reached out to me the same night, said almost the same thing, and she is now my tattoo artist. She's the only one that does any of my tattoos. I refuse to go to anybody else. Um,
It's
she
funny.
moved to
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
No, 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 go ahead.
She moved to North Carolina, and I just went there and got my tattoo done, and I scheduled the tattoo I got for my brother on his 2 years.
Oh,
She
wow.
did that tattoo for me on his 2 year passing. So it's a very special relationship I have with her.
Yeah.
I've been told for like the last year, oh, you should just find another tattoo artist. I'm like, it's not even about the art that I want. It's the concept of staying loyal to somebody who did that for you.
Absolutely. And I think that, we have people in our lives that come forward, that step forward. And I can speak to this. I have thankfully never had an attempt, but I will say that there have been times in my life that there have been deep, deep wounds and sadness. And, one of the things that I remember in my life, and you talk about, your tattoo artist and getting tattoos. And um, I remember when I was going through my divorce, and I was very active in the church at that time. And I remember thinking that this is going to, these are the people that are going to embrace me. These are the people that are going to come to my side and put their arms around me and say, "We got you. Like, this is, we see your pain. This is where you're safe." And ironically, it wasn't there where I was seen and heard. It was the people that you would never expect that step forward, that are like, "Wow, like, I didn't, you're just kind of a fringe person. Like, I never even knew you knew who I was." And I find that so interesting that in the times of my life where I have really been at a place where, again, I've done my own work, I've done my own therapy. It's why I became a therapist, is because someone saw and heard me and said, "Let me take you from where you are to where you want to go." And I will never forget that woman and those words and what it meant to me. But it's funny because she was covered in tattoos, and it's just funny because we have judgments, I think, about people. We make judgments about people. People look at you or look at me and maybe just make a split decision about who we are.
Right.
And I have always found it interesting that the people who step forward are not the people you expect.
Facts. Yeah. When she reached out to me, it was very unexpected because I think I knew her from a mutual friend. I don't remember how we met each other, but the message was just completely, left field. It was out of nowhere. And when she said that she read the status and she screenshotted before I deleted it, and she messaged me, and just that whole conversation was just kind of like, okay, I need to step down off of this cliff. I need to reevaluate the things around me, and get out of this pain that I have sat in for almost over 10 years. And that brought me to my first therapist when I was in New Jersey. And I'll never forget the first two sessions that I had with her. I couldn't stop crying. Um, could barely, was barely able to be understood because of how much I was crying. There was just so much pain for
Mm.
ever since I was a kid to
Yeah.
then.
I call that an ugly cry. And I
Yeah.
have been right where you said, and I have had an ugly cry, like snot coming out my nose and everything, because, and how awesome that is. Because what I was going to ask you right before that was, you said, I spent a decade feeling numb. And that is also such a common presentation for depression.
Yeah.
That it's not that you walk around, with your hands and knuckles dragging across the ground, like you just can't. That can be a way it presents, but a lot of times it's just this numbness. You're just on autopilot and you feel nothing.
Right.
So, and what happens is when we're ready, it just comes pouring out of us. And how awesome that you were able to allow it to come out of you. And what did that feel like?
So, growing up in a family where, it wasn't normal to express your feelings like that, right? And
Mhm.
crying was just kind of something as a cowardly thing to do as a man, right? And when I was, across the room from a woman who was a therapist, I felt comfortable because I knew I needed to get help for myself because I was in a dangerous level of a really bad mentality. And when I started going to therapy, I started, opening my eyes to all the things around me, like all the red flags that were in my household living with my mom at the time. And after, I think I was with her for 3 months. The very last session we had before I moved back down to Florida was, I remember when you couldn't look me in the eye, our first two sessions. And, I think about our very last session, I completely shaved off my beard, shaved off my hair. She's like, I could see your face. Like I could see how much work you've put into changing and trying to do better for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was just a very powerful feeling because for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's powerful. And a lot of people who do the work of healing, and it's work, that's the thing. It's like it would be nice if we could skip, hop, and jump over all the ick that we don't want to feel, but we have to feel it. We have to go through it. And it's that process of feeling, and I'm a big believer of mind, body, and trauma being stored in the body. And um I'm really trying to put the message now in my content about really connecting the dots between trauma and our bodies, and how an entire nervous system gets dysregulated.
Right.
Because when we have a traumatic event in our life, our body will store it. Our body will feel it. The trauma is not the event. The trauma is how the change that happens in our physical body as a result of it, and it's in there.
Oh yeah.
And if we don't give it a way out, it will manifest in some other way. And more and more and more, we're starting to see the connection between those suppressed, not felt, stifled emotions as manifesting in physical illness,
Right.
coming out in hypertension and autoimmune disorders and inflammatory disorders, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, all these other physical ways that our nervous system has basically shut down because our
Right.
nervous system has been fried. And when you said numb, there's two states. There's when our nervous system has absorbed so much trauma, we either go hyper arousal or hypo arousal, or we ping pong between the two. And that hypo arousal is what you described, which is just checked out, numb, dissociation, like just going through the motions,
Yeah.
because feeling is not, number one, allowed because you're a guy. And number two, how do you process when you're not given an example, a healthy way of what that looks like,
Right.
you know?
And to add to that too, when social media, started blowing up and when TikTok started coming out, when Instagram started blowing up as much as it is now, It's become an even more uphill battle too, being a guy trying to talk about mental health, because you either get silenced or you get told that you're nothing. And there was one video that I made on TikTok a couple months ago about my mom, saying how I cut off my mom and I didn't feel great about it. I
Yeah.
feel terrible every day that I had to cut her off, but she was an energy leech.
Yeah.
Somebody had commented on there that I didn't know shit and I didn't walk in her shoes. And I said, you know what? I didn't walk in her shoes because she was too busy beating me with those shoes.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where abuse is not talked about nearly enough with guys.
Absolutely.
Because I feel we endure a lot of mental abuse.
Mhm.
It's the physical abuse is there, it happens, but the mental abuse and the verbal abuse that I have gone through with my mom alone um, would probably have somebody's jaw on the ground. She has done things to me that somebody who is a loving mother, and I use air quotes saying that, should have never done. And it is because she had all this unhealed trauma and victim mentality that she just didn't want to heal.
Yes.
And while that came with me forgiving her so many times, that also came with me having to draw those boundaries, because
Yeah.
she was not putting in the work to
Yeah.
make sure that she heals from all that trauma, to break that cycle that her parents created for her.
And that's what it is. It's a cycle.
Right.
And I'm really glad that you brought that up because, you know, we all have the ability to change our life. And there
100%.
have been people that have been through atrocities that to even speak of, and things I've heard as a therapist that people have endured. And it would make anybody just their eyes just, I mean, it would, it's amazing what the human spirit can endure and not break. Now that,
Especially for somebody that you love.
absolutely. And that's what's so hard with childhood trauma is, and we touched on this a little bit when you and I spoke earlier about how it is this um, when it imprints when we're young, it stays in our subconscious. It gets lodged there because our brains are not fully formed. They're not for many years. And so when we're in those theta and delta waves where children live, that's why their imaginations are so rich. When things happen, we don't have any ability to make sense of it. We can't logically say, well, mom is struggling because mom has issues and addictions, and she's just repeating patterns that she learned. Like, we don't have that ability as children.
Right.
We just interpret, I must be bad, I must be awful, I must be unlovable, I am unworthy. And that stays with us until we go back and do the work of healing.
Right.
And yes, our parents have struggles. Yes, they may have their own reasons, but at some point, we have to break the cycle.
Right.
And at some point, we have to say, okay, you didn't do it, but I'm going to. And it is hard to create a boundary with a family member because we think the old adage, blood's thicker than water, they're your family. However, at some point, we're also adults and we get to decide who is in our life,
Right.
regardless if they are related to us or not. And that is one of the hardest boundaries to create because society, again, tells us they're your mother, you need to love them. Well, that's great. That's awesome. Yes, they are our mothers, and that's awesome. And they also have the ability to make choices to heal too.
Exactly. And the hardest part is basically what you just said is, oh, well, society says it's your mom. You have to love her unconditionally. You have to forgive her. You have to do everything to make sure your relationship stays strong with her. Right. Um, to put my mom and I's relationship in perspective, my parents got divorced when I was about 8 years old, and I had a teacher by the name of Teresa Ramsauer. Sweetest human being I still know to this day, and I'm still very close with her. My mom hated the relationship I had with her because I put her above mom. I put one of my best friend's moms above my mom, and she hated that I appreciated and loved them more than I did my own mom because I think that was a unintentional emotional response to how my mom was treating me as a kid. Um, Years later, I found out things from my second mom of the things my mom did to me, and it made that relationship between my mom and I even worse. Um, After my first attempt, my mom sent me away to my second mom's house for a month, told me that she didn't want to put up with me anymore, and didn't come to see me, check on me for like a month. And going back, I'm glad I don't remember that directly. I remember staying at her house for a month. I don't remember why, but I just remember how awful things were between me and my mom growing up.
Yeah.
Because the amount of times that the police had to come to our house because of guys she was with, and the amount of conversations I've had with officers saying that I was the most mature person in the house at the age of 15, 16 years old.
Yeah.
When I went to college right after high school, I kind of got pressured into going because of my mom. She always wanted to try and have control over my life at any means. So I went to the college that she went to. Um, I switched my major from IT to criminal justice because IT was just really hard for me to. I didn't want to go to school. I was terrible at school to begin with. So the first time that I walk into that class, the teacher pulls me aside after class, and he's like, "Hey, is your mom so and so?" I'm like, "Yeah, why?" "Oh, I was one of the officers that dealt with her case a couple years ago." And I said, "I
Wow.
remember you." I'm like, "That's embarrassing. Thank you for telling me that."
Wow. I'm
Yeah,
so sorry for your pain. As you're sharing this, I just have to acknowledge that. And, it's so hard to hear and hold. And yet I am so blessed and grateful that you're able to share that. And you can be heard. And those pains can be held. And nobody should endure the pains and the traumas that it sounds like you have gone through. And you also, to also speak to the fact that you had other adults in your life that were able to provide you love and attention and care. And that's something that's also important. Like that's that is such an important element when we have other people in our life, because that's other people can be those second moms, those surrogate, those we can have other people come in, coaches, teachers that fill in the gaps, and we can learn our worth. And it doesn't have to be from a biological parent.
right.
There are probably millions of children that have gotten love and care from people that were not their blood relatives, that stepped in at critical points in their life and said, "Take my hand, I see you." And that can be all we need just to tether us to this world.
I couldn't agree more. Year After I graduated, when I was as an younger adult, me and Teresa, we started talking a lot more, started getting a lot closer and stuff. And I went to her mom's funeral.
Mm,
All the teachers that were there to support her and everything were asking, "Oh, well, who's he? Who's he?" "Oh, he's my student from like 10, 15 years ago."
wow.
Um, and she is absolutely godsend. I think the absolute world of her. If there's one person that's still alive in my life that has had an impact as heavy as her, I can't think of any. She has one of the most selfless human beings I've ever known. And she taught me how to tie my shoes. It's a very special woman.
Yeah. Yeah. And at some point too, just to speak to this, I'm going to put my therapy hat on for a hot second because you're sitting right here in front of me. And that would be that I would also hope that you and whoever else has gone through the healing part of trauma, that we can get to the point where we, when I use the word forgiveness, a lot of people kind of push back on that a little bit too, because they're like, how could you forgive someone who did these atrocities and all that stuff? But again, if we go back to what the body holds, if we're holding anger, if we're holding resentment, that can also make us ill.
Right.
And there's a difference between forgiving and saying what you did was okay. That's not what I'm saying. Forgiveness is saying that I'm going to choose to be whole and love me, and I release this anger and resentment out of my body. I let it go. I let
Right.
it go. And forgiveness is what we do for us.
Absolutely.
Forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves when we let go of the burden of holding on to the anger and the pain of our past. And it's hard to it's not that you forget. It's just that you learn to live with the duality of knowing that that's your past, and you are choosing to walk with knowing to your bones how beautiful and worthy you are. And you tuck that inside your body too. And it
Right.
becomes a part of your story, it becomes a part of who you are. And that's also so needed when we're doing the work of healing. And speak to that. Where are you with that? And how was the process of getting to that point? Or are you at that point? Like, maybe I'm being too personal now, but like,
No, not at all. I think with my mom, the way that she says sorry, she says it in a way that she says it because she want to hear it, not
uh,
because she means it.
sure.
So I'm at the point where I have indirectly forgiven her. I
Mhm.
have accepted that she's never going to change.
Mhm.
I have accepted that I will probably never have peace until she passes away.
Mhm.
Um, and I've had this conversation with my therapist a million times. I feel terrible saying that last sentence, because you don't wish death on anybody. You don't wish
No,
ill on anybody.
you
But
don't. But I will tell you that there is a pain that will also go away when that happens. And
100%.
that's not wishing someone to be gone. It's just understanding that that too brings another level of healing. And it's
Right.
not that you wish anyone ill, obviously. But that is truth. That is truth. And that will also bring a level of closure,
Yeah.
that will allow you to go to that next level of forgiveness. And it's a process,
Yeah.
and that it and and healing is not linear.
Right.
It is this, we make two steps forward, one step back, maybe one sideways and one up, and it's a journey. So speak to maybe a young man that's listening. What would be your take on how to navigate being a guy and getting all these mixed messages from the world of be strong, be vulnerable, carry the weight of the job? No, be a stay-at-home dad. Like, I have two boys, and I hear from them too that there's this mixed bag of what men are expected to be. And I think if I were a guy, I would be struggling with what my roles are. Now, as a woman, I have struggled with that too. Like, be a career woman, be a stay-at-home mom. Well, I did both.
Right.
And they both have merits in my life. And I'm grateful for both of those opportunities. But how is it to be a young guy? Because you're young.
Right.
How is
Um,
it to be a young man navigating the messages you hear about what it is to be a man?
so a couple things there. I think the number one thing is I don't think the protector role should ever go away. I think being a man, being a protector is a great thing, because that can come in so many different forms. That can come in the form of protecting your inner child. That can come in the form of protecting if you have children, of the external factors that could affect them. And the second thing is self-love. That was the hardest thing for me to do as a man, is loving the person I see in the mirror.
Mm.
It took me probably over a year and a half of therapy sessions and just trials and tribulation to look in the mirror and say, hey, you're doing a great job. I love you. And most guys, and I'll say most, because I'm sure most guys don't do that. I think most guys would benefit so much from saying how good of a job they do.
Yeah.
And, there's nothing that makes you any lesser of a man sharing your emotions and sharing what you have, you're struggling with, because we're in this silent epidemic of men taking their lives because society is telling us to keep it to yourself, because society says you're less of a man because of you sharing the things that are going on at home, the wrongs that are going on in your relationship, or the relationship you don't have with your parents. Me trying to go into the dating world, I'm embarrassed to tell women about my relationship with my mom because of how bad it is, because I don't want it to reflect on me on how I see women, because it's not the truth. I think I've been able to have that conversation with maybe two, saying that, hey, this is what's going on with me and my mom, and I don't want to scare you away, but it's not a reflection on my character.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to express to people, because not a lot of people understand that, especially people that grew up with a two-person household.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I always felt, and you mentioned divorce, and my parents divorced when I was a little bit younger than you were. I always felt this brokenness because back in the 70s, like, people didn't get divorced.
Right.
Like, there was a big stigma, and that's just not what you did. And I always felt broken, and I always felt like I was less than because my parents divorced and I didn't have, all my friends had intact families. And I struggled to keep my marriage together just because I didn't want that stigma, even though it was toxic for so long, until I finally did the work that you're talking about doing and finding that self-love. And when you finally can look in the mirror and go, I love you, and I deserve better, um, that's when everything changes. And that self-love, as you now know, is what will allow you to attract healthy love in your life. Now you're going to attract someone who is going to be able to hold that and go, wow, I see the work you've done to get to the point that you are. And I am so grateful that you are, number one, that protector, which is beautiful. I love that. Love that. And also, you're vulnerable, you're kind, you have the ability to share these vulnerabilities. So there's a lucky girl out there, Chris, who's just, she's gonna just, you're gonna know, because you're doing the work to attract healthy. And that's another huge message, is that if we don't go back and do this and heal those traumas, whatever those traumas are, and you can have a great, great childhood and have an intact family and look like everything's perfect and be a hot mess on the inside still.
Right.
And when you go back and do the work, you learn to look in the mirror and go, I love me. And it's really funny because my now husband, who is my soulmate, and when I did the work, then, obviously we attract different, we attract healthy, we attract someone who knows how to love and honor us. And now, like, we'll kind of jokingly say, like, I used to often self degrade myself, like, oh, why am I so fat? Or I can't believe, what's wrong with what is this wrinkle? What is this bulge? And he would say, stop talking like that about my wife. And I'd be like, oh my goodness. So we now jokingly will say, like, if we get dressed, I'm like, I look awesome. And he'll be like, yeah, you do. And I'll be like, you look so good. He's like, I know. And so we have this kind of banter that, because I specifically would kind of do that. And that's a real work in progress, not, I think, for everybody, men and women. struggle to look at ourselves in the mirror and go, love ya, looking good.
Right.
You're going to kill it today. You're going to be awesome. We don't do that.
Right. And, in a back to the social media conversation, in a world of fast information and a lot of judgment, it's really hard to stay on that path of self-love and stay on that path of trying to build yourself up, because sometimes us as human beings need that affirmation, and we'll post a picture on there and like, oh, I got one, like I'm not this, I'm not that.
Yeah.
And then when you're vulnerable with people, it's like you get attention sometimes and then you don't. I think the hardest thing for me, because I didn't grow up in an age of social media, thank God.
Right. Me either. Thank heavens.
And it was a completely different time growing up, because that was when texting was starting to get big. And when social media got introduced, when it was MySpace, it wasn't as bad. But when Facebook and Twitter and everything else started coming along, it's like it opened the gates for so much negativity.
Yes.
And
people felt like they could be mean behind the screen. They would say things that you would never say to someone's face.
Right. And I feel like a lot of the people that are on that journey of healing struggle to siphon through the social media trenches, because it's like, you want to do really good for yourself, but you also want to talk to your friends, and then you see all this negativity, and it's really hard. The healing journey comes in so many different aspects now.
It does. And it's really hard. Like, I am new to social media, and I'm in my 50s, and I just started this. And okay, funny story. I was pregnant with my, oh gosh, second child. And I got my first cell phone when I was 38 years old. They just weren't, they weren't around. Like, you had like an emergency phone, maybe the technology just came out. And I remember I got stranded. I was pregnant at the airport. And I needed to go to the bathroom, but I couldn't stop. I was picking up my dad from the airport. His plane was canceled, but I didn't know that. I circled the airport for 2 hours, pregnant with children, terrified to go home because I can't leave my dad. And so I ended up pulling over on the side of the road. I was sobbing. I found a police officer, and I was like, oh, I gotta pee. And there's my dad's coming, and he was able to console me and let me know, no, the flight's been canceled. And that night I was like, I need a cell phone, because if I'd had a phone, like, someone could have called me and said, hey, like, flight's canceled. But now, it's inundated, and the social media platform, and again, I'm on social media now as an adult with a mission like you, to bring awareness and healing and give people tools to help move their life forward. And I still get people that will come at me, and I'm like, whoa, like,
yeah, I'm
just out here trying to sprinkle some love in the world.
It's brutal.
What are we doing?
Right. It's I think TikTok has probably been the hardest part of social media content that I've tried to create, because it's like you comment on something and somebody immediately jumps down your throat because they don't agree with you. It's like, this world is so hard to navigate through. We don't need that much negativity.
No, we don't. And it's hard. And I have gotten kind of bruised and disappointed, and really had to take a step back, because your intention, like my intention, is to bring awareness and healing. And when someone comes out of left field, it can really upset you and be like, what am I even doing? Like, and if you're not in a good space, we both know the deleterious and negative effects that social media can have on young people's mental health.
Absolutely.
And especially that 13, 14, 15, maybe even 12, like I'd go in, maybe even, honestly, probably
I believe
younger.
I believe it's like 12 to 26, I think, is that demographic.
Yeah, and that's that again, brains aren't fully formed. We got a lot of information coming through social media about what is okay and what is acceptable and how you need to look and how you need to be and how all these mixed messages and all this it just overload. Speaking of a fried nervous system, like when you're getting that much information, again, all that is coming into your energy, into your space, into your body, and we need a way to do that. So how do you practice self-love? What are things that you do that keep you in a good mental space as a guy that men or woman could listen to and go, hey, I like that, I'm going to put that in my life?
So for me, music has always been a really big coping tool for me. Ever since I was a little kid. I have constantly have Spotify near me. I always have music playing, always looking for new music, probably like every single day. And to add to that, I journal sometimes just to try and get thoughts out of my head that I don't want there.
Mhm.
Um, a really big thing for me is sunsets. I usually will sit by the water and just like embrace that cool breeze and just watch the colors change in the sky and stuff. Um, and that the sunset thing has always been a big part of who I am growing up, but even more so when I had a really close friend pass away during the pandemic. She was very close to my heart, and we would always share sunset photos with each other and always talk about going out on her brother's boat and stuff and go watch the sun go down. She went into the hospital to have a mass removed from her stomach and she passed away of liver failure unexpectedly. Um, Ironically enough, Santi, my brother that passed away 2 years ago, was helping me grieve Amy. Lo and behold, he was preparing me to grieve for him too.
Wow.
Um, so sunsets have always been a way of me connecting with her, and every time I see the moon I connect with him. So I would say for anybody, especially guys that just don't know how to get through what they're going through, man, connect yourself with a positive energy and stick around it. I think sunsets for me are always super peaceful. You can have music playing in your ear if you want to, or just sit there and listen to the waves and everything, and just embrace all the good things around you. Because I know, in a society of fast information, it's hard to just stop. It's hard to just take in everything good around you. Sometimes I don't want to leave bed, but I know that I need to get out of bed and I need to insert my energy somewhere where it's either stand still, or I go out and just try and think of ways to get through the day, in a as less negative as possible.
Yeah.
So I guess, best advice, embrace that positive energy around you.
Yeah. So those two things, I'm going to just highlight those because those are so important. And I think that that's beautiful. And so thank you for sharing what you do. And I think that as a general rule, connecting with nature, is healing.
Yeah.
And for me, it's trees and rocks. Like I'm an earth mama and I like to be, on the earth, sitting on the earth, you know, flesh touching grass or stone or tree. Like that's really grounding for me. And being still. And that's where I think, you hit it when you said fast paced, fast information. Like we're in a culture, a society where it's on turbo. And what I think there's this collective desire to do, and what COVID and the loss of so many people have maybe brought to light, is that we have to treasure those moments, those people, that positivity, and create stillness
Right.
in a world that is coming so hard and fast. We have to create that. We have to set aside intention. And I talk about this in the courses and the things that I teach other people, is that we have to be intentional about that. The world is going to come at us 90 miles an hour unless we make a choice to say, I'm going to step over here and sit my bones down next to this body of water and look at the sunset or tree or this cozy chair, or just be still.
Right.
We can't hear the whispers of our soul. We can't hear the longings of our heart. We can't even hear the emotions and the energy and the pain trapped in our body unless we stop.
Right.
And we have to create that stillness in order to heal. And it's interesting. Again, I'm in the process of creating a new course, and things just drop out of the sky sometimes, and I'm like, okay, I need to create this. And what I'm kind of working on now, which is kind of mulling around in my heart, is creating a system, a program for people to take that nervous system dysregulation, where we're always stuck in this fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, which is the sympathetic nervous system running the show, which is fast, coming at you,
Right.
coming at you. And being able to flip the switch and move into the sympathetic. I mean, the parasympathetic. The parasympathetic is that calm, that rest and reset. And it's in the parasympathetic nervous system where we do the healing and teaching people how to cultivate, create that inner stillness, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is where we do the repair, which is where we learn how to heal, where we learn to listen to our body, where we learn to give a voice. I'm going to steal it. Give a voice to the voiceless parts of ourselves, because we can't do that in the chaos of the crazy and the stress and the go and the burnout and the hustle. We got to look at the sunsets. We got to stop. We got to get back and connect to the circuitry that is our nervous system,
Right.
which is where mind and body intersect, where
Right.
the body is yearning to be heard and the mind has to be stilled and connected to the body in order to hear.
I couldn't agree more. I think COVID was that time for everybody where it was so weird to see the world so still.
Yes.
And when I used to try and go see sunsets before Amy passed away, and during the pandemic when everything got closed down, and it was just super weird to go out anywhere. Um, I think it made so many appreciate the quietness that is possible in this world. I wish we could be at a point in this world where that can happen more often without a pandemic happening.
Correct.
And for me, I don't like isolation. I don't like peace all that much. Like, I like a peaceful home. Like, I remember I was making a sandwich the other day and it was completely quiet. And it threw me off because I always have background noise. It's always, I hear a fan or I hear my air conditioner. And there was nothing. I'm like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever experienced in my life because it was so quiet.
Yeah.
And that's how the pandemic was.
Yeah.
All the empty roads, all the stores that didn't have that many people. It was genuinely a weird time to be alive. And it's hard to think that was 3 years ago when that started.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, there's so many thoughts that are coming as you say that, and that a lot of people run from the stillness because the stillness is, again, it's where our bodies and our minds start to tell us what we need to do, and we don't want to hear it often. People have to be ready to go into the fire of healing. And like, I think I maybe shared with you on your podcast, it's like, I'm like, okay, here's this flaming pile of poo and I'm going to give it to you. And you're going to be like, so happy to have this because it's hard work and you got to go in there and go, oh, I don't even want to go there. Yeah. But it's really kind of trudging through the trenches of our own stuff and being okay with the stillness and being okay with the feelings that come from that and allowing that to just pour out of your body and regardless of what that looks like, and giving permission to feel and be still. And I really hope that the more people like you, like me, like the people that have the courage, honestly, to put yourself out there and say, let's talk about these uncomfortable things. And um, knowing that we may get stuff coming at us too, but knowing that that is going to move the dial for someone, that there could be someone listening right now that hears your story and says, I got something to live for. I I I want to learn how to create stillness. I want to see the beauty of a sunset and connect to people that are no longer here. I want to be able to be that protector and be vulnerable and be strong simultaneously. And by doing the work that you've done, you're going to create and end the cycle. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's reason to do it. But again, it's kind of a hard sell to say, let's dive into this creek and swim around in our yuckiness and feel it. Yeah.
I attribute healing the equivalent of walking through glass. And by that I mean, growing up in a toxic cycle. There are so many pieces of you that are broken and all over the ground that you don't know what to pick up, you don't know what to take with you. So while you're walking on that glass, you're looking down on the ground while you're hurting yourself, which is part of healing, and picking up those pieces of yourself that, oh wow, I really like that piece of me. I want to take it back with me. And you keep gathering up all the pieces of glass that you want to take with you in healing. And then by the time you're at the end of that road, after all that glass you stepped on, after all the hurt that you felt that you had to dig up from yourself, you have all that positive stuff to take away from that healing journey. And like you said, being able to create a future that is so possible, because the people that are starting their healing journeys now are so afraid to see what they have to walk through in order to heal.
Yes.
And be able to put in that work, be able to take a shovel essentially and dig up your old self to see where you got hurt, where there what pieces of you still need to heal. And in the meantime, you have to honor your inner child. You have to do the things that the adults in your life growing up weren't able to do for you. And that has been one of the biggest parts of my journey that my therapist gave to me, was honoring my inner child. Being able to celebrate holidays again, being able to put up a Christmas tree that I didn't want to see in a house because the house that I was in wasn't a home.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, I feel like when it comes to saying out loud, oh yeah, I'm going to start my healing journey today, most people don't know what it's going to take to heal.
No. And and that's why it's so important to have accountability and people and people who've gone through and walked through the glass. And that is a beautiful metaphor, analogy of walking through the brokenness and picking up the pieces, because that's literally what it is. And as you were talking, again, I'm thinking about your podcast mission, a voice for the voiceless. That's exactly what healing your inner child did for you. You actually gave voice to the little person inside all of us to be able to be heard. And when we do that, we allow that integration, that little tiny piece of us that is still in there, to be given a bigger voice, to be able to say, I was hurt, I am hurting, I need to be heard and held. And that's just such a beautiful way to kind of wrap up, is that your mission, you have lived it. You have walked through the glass. You have picked up those pieces. You've brushed them off, looked at them and said, yeah, this is good, this is coming with me. This piece, nah, I don't think that is something I want to carry. I'm going to put that down. Oh, let me pick up this piece. And we create wholeness,
right,
from breaking ourselves open and looking inside. And one of the things that I think that I really want to kind of sort of end on is what happens when we do that. And what happens when we do that is it's more beautiful it's more loving, it's more peaceful, it's more joyful, it's so much better. But we don't know that.
Right.
We don't know that. And so we're afraid to take a step onto the path toward healing.
I couldn't agree more. I think the most beautiful part about healing is the ability to read people. I think being able to see red flags around you, I think, is one of the most important things in our
Mhm.
healing journey, because throughout life we're given lessons, over and over again, whether that whether that lesson is a job, whether that lesson is a relationship, whether that lesson is the people that struggle through addiction or people that have been to jail. Those are lessons. Those are not a life sentence. And for most people that find that obstacle, that find that trial in their life, when you're able to finish or even get in the middle of your healing, you're able to see all the progress that you've made. You're able to finally start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
Mhm.
And when you get to that light, when you're able to stand on your own 2 feet and be that beacon of hope, be that lighthouse, is my therapist so eloquently put. Be that lighthouse for people that are still in the waters trying to guide themselves away from the rocks. Um, the possibilities are so endless when you heal, when you're able to complete that journey. Healing is something that I feel like is a lifelong journey.
It
You're
is.
never going to finish. When you
Exactly.
hit when you hit the top of that mountain, there's always more to climb, whether
There's
you stay
always
down.
more.
Right. And being able to help other people find that voice, being able to guide people through the shark infested waters. It's so wholesome, and it's such a great feeling when
Yeah.
you're able to help so many.
Yeah, it is. And I compliment you on your work and sharing your vulnerabilities. And there's also kind of this saying, I don't know where I read this, but I believe this to be true, that there's the gifts of the pain, that when we have endured, we are given a gift in exchange. And
Right.
that the gift that we get by having endured is a greater insight, greater intuition, being able to read situations. We have a almost like a sixth sense that
Right.
is the gift of having gone through the trials that some people would say we signed up for, like before we even got here, like we signed up for the journey to learn the lessons we need to learn. And when you view it in that way, it's like, okay, then let's keep going, let's keep peeling back those layers, like let's keep learning and growing and finding my soul's purpose, finding the beautiful light inside of me, finding my way back home to me, which is wholeness. And being the beacon, um not only for the people immediately in your world, but for the people that, if we're going to put a positive spin on social media, the people that you may impact that you will never see.
Yeah. Um,
And that's powerful.
I agree. I have a friend, Ashley, who she's been on my podcast before. She's a coach and everything. She does bodybuilding and stuff. And I send her like affirmation posts on Instagram sometimes. She's like, I just want to thank you for constantly uplifting me, even when you don't know that you're doing that.
Ah,
And
that's awesome.
when you have somebody like that who you
Hmm.
admire and you look up to because
Yeah.
of just all the great things they're doing,
Yeah.
for them to be able to tell you how much you're doing
Yeah.
is just such a great feeling, because at one point somebody gifted you darkness. Somebody gave you a box, you opened it, was a whole big box of darkness, and you weren't sure what to do with it. When you harness it and you embrace that darkness and you turn that into light, it is the most indescribable feeling of accomplishment when you're able to change that darkness and
Yeah.
make it positive for everybody around you.
Absolutely. And that's a beautiful way to, I mean, I love all your analogies and all your pictures. I think in pictures. So I think that resonates with me, and I'm sure many others too, and we all have that dark side, that shadow side. We have to do the dark, the shadow work in order to see our lightness. We have to, I call it the fertile darkness, where we understand that box of darkness is where we sprout new seeds of growth. It doesn't happen in any other space. It happens in the darkness. And that's absolutely true. And it is in the darkness that we find our light.
Couldn't agree
And
more.
that's just it's a beautiful thing. So I'm going to end this with, okay, you did this to me and I'm going to put you right back on the hot seat. So if you could, I'm going to steal this because it was so good. If you had a movie that would describe your life, what would it be?
Oh, a
Or
movie
a
that
song, or a
okay.
song, because you
Okay.
love songs.
I'll give you a song.
Okay.
Let's see. I would probably say the song is called My Name by From Ashes to New. It's one of my favorite bands right now, and I went to a concert of theirs, I think about 2 years ago now, and I met the lead singer, and he remembered my name from social media.
Wow, that's
First and
cool.
last name. It was the craziest
No,
experience ever. And the lyrics of that song were all my life they told me that I couldn't and told me that I shouldn't, and basically it's a song of overcoming. It's overcoming all those doubters, overcoming all those demons, and being able to tell the world your name and the impact that you're making. So that's probably my song.
that's awesome. That is awesome. What a beautiful message. Well, it has been such a pleasure having you here.
Thank you for having me.
And I thank you so much for your inspiration, the positive message, the work that you're doing. We need more guys doing exactly what you're doing, which is speaking up and talking about this and giving permission to speak to what it is to navigate world, being the protector. I love that. That's so beautiful. And shouldering everything that we expect men to do, and being vulnerable and open and honest. And it's just a beautiful message. So I look forward to talking with you again, because you got some good stuff going on, and I'm excited to have you here, and we will continue at some point talking
Yeah,
about other stuff. So,
absolutely.
Chris, thank you again for being with us, and tell everybody how they can listen to your podcast. How can they, get on and look at your social stuff, so that if your message especially resonated with them, they can follow along and do more and get into your world.
Sure. So my podcast is on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. It is called The Voice for the Voiceless. For the Instagram page, it is Mental Health Movement Pod, and TikTok is Fellow Traveler MH, which is for mental health. And on Facebook, our group is Mental Health Movement. All is welcome.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for being here. It has been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.